I really are looking forward to this evening, like I'm sure all of you are. I've got beside me here the president of the Hot Stuff Club, a man that teaches but doesn't teach anywhere, a man who went, would you believe, to hear the Grateful Dead last night. You had it wrong at one stage, I remember, as well. I can't remember, nearly dead, I think he said. A man you all know as well as I do, nearly. I have had the pleasure of working with him twice. Once on a competition in Norway. This was in the early 70s with Archigram and a friend of ours called Per Cartvet and another friend of ours called Tony Dugdale. And it was quite an experience, I tell you. The Archigram boys at the time, you have to forgive me for saying that, were hot stuff. I mean, we could draw like a dream. And Cedric came along and actually in the end produced the only drawing that mattered, which I have at home. And a man that I always refer students to in terms of sort of analysing programs, analysing what he does, systematic, and you've only got to look at the projects in the South Durham and you'll see that. I mean, supreme. And one of the best watercolourists around as well. So you're going to have to work very hard tonight, I tell you. He doesn't allow you to fall asleep. You'll miss the point totally. So you've got to work at it and listen very carefully.
That's a real... You know, I would have said it. He hadn't. Great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Ron, and thank you, AA, for asking me. And, wait a minute, turn on my thing. And thank you, all those who worked in a very short time to put together that exhibition, the little one in that room. But that is key to what I'm saying tonight. It doesn't matter whether you've seen it yet. In fact, if you don't like what I say tonight, then it's not worth looking at it between now and Friday when it goes. If you do like what I say tonight, or if you're puzzled by what I say tonight, and don't have anything better to do than clear up sort of dead pumpkin skins tomorrow morning, have a look at it. Because I'm not covering it except in shorthand. I'm assuming that you've either seen it or will see it, or in fact would not benefit from either. Now, having had that special, and after all, it's all going to be Halloween at 9 o'clock. So I think after that introduction, which actually I enjoyed even more than any of you know, it was very clever and very nice, I'd like to dedicate tonight, because it's a night, I hope, of delight, because we're looking forward. You all know the gloom. I hinted at it in the blurb, printed green on Weetabix coloured paper, as AA does. But if any of you actually read the little introduction to tonight on the notes, you'll see that I've done my grumbles there in 2 lines. So tonight should be fun. Might not be gentle, but we'll see. Might be. I may not realize my age. But I would like to dedicate it to someone who never grew old, who I was delighted to have as a personal friend, who I think is one of the greatest architects of the 20th century, who's just died. I think he was probably tired. Bertold Lubetkin. And I'd like to dedicate tonight to him because I've drawn so much from him and from his buildings. And if you don't see any others, go and look at the staircase at Bevan Court, Finsbury Park, in the cheap public housing block, the staircase. And go and look at the Finsbury Health Centre. if you can't do any of the others. He wrote to me 19th of March this year because I'd picked him up. I told him I thought his blood was getting thin, or he was getting incredibly old, or he was showing off, because he'd objected to some yuppies buying his house in his farm in Cotswolds. And I wrote, and I got Xeroxes from very old books pointing out that from the mid-17th century onwards, farmhouses in the Cotswolds had largely been occupied what was then the new middle class. Big farmers, lawyers, things like that. And I pointed out that therefore there's nothing wrong in his thing going over. And that I knew that he played quite seriously at growing pigs, but I did think he was getting a bit old and tetchy and right-wing and things. And we used to have these correspondences. They were always incredibly polite. Dear Cedric, the misunderstanding to which you draw my attention, I didn't say it was a misunderstanding. I said he was wrong. He should. The misunderstanding to which you draw my attention, I think, is due to the fact that both the cottages and early farmhouses were primarily concerned with the environment for dwelling. What I did warn against was that whoever buys the upper Kilcott farm buys a tool which provides a way of life and work. The 17th and 18th centuries were mainly concerned with eating and not with amenities. By selling the barn, this simple equation is invalidated. Yours sincerely, Lobetkin, B. Lobetkin. See, and fortunately, Peter Cook had him open that exhibition later this year. And so I was able to get back to him verbally on that. And of course, we still didn't agree. Wonderful. And it gives me delight to think of him while I talk tonight. Now, what actually he was suggesting was that, what I think he was suggesting was actually saying to me, look, don't leave it to others. You know, well, come on, let us just be a bit sharper in the future. Let's be a bit more useful to ourselves and to the degrees in which we can enable conditions which others haven't yet thought about, even if they were able to enable. And this is emphasized by, in his case, dividing something that hadn't been divided and referring back 200 years towards a rather sort of quick action that he was planning in the immediate future or whatever. And I quite like that realization of we have to be a lot quicker on our feet. And I think we will be if we remain architects. And this is all about tomorrow, tonight. And so I would like to point out that there's no one around helping us. And that is marvelous. We're on our own. For instance, we'll finish by 9, probably not a minute before, though. Right? Mr. Robert Atkins, this is a recent thing. This, by the way, this was sent to me. People send me things. I think they think that when you get to my age, you probably don't read yourself till someone sends you something, draws attention to it. And I like that. This was sent to me by the editor of Building Design, so he thought I'd like it. I don't need a magnifying glass. Mr. Robert Atkins, Minister of Roads and Traffic, yesterday ruled out strategic planning and road pricing as ways of tackling London's congestion. He told the Institution of Civil Engineers seminar that the integrated approach to transport policy sounded too much like centralized control. So, you know, there we are. Then, so we're on our own. Don't worry about that. We have another one. IUA. Now, I've got it in the neck from the IUA. I'm a judge of a competition, international competition, for ideas on urban housing, new ideas on urban housing, being run internationally over Europe, and I'm one of the foreign jurors for the French section. The IUA have objected. Now, the RIBA having accepted it, I wish they'd sort of check these group of tired grey men. I wish they'd talk to each other more often. You get a more, more regular grey. However, the IUA have objected. They said that this is quite outrageous. They will not accept this invitation because, after all, it's an ideas competition. They said that and what's more, it's pretty outrageous. Not only is it suggested that it's an ideas competition, but it's suggested that the contestants write the brief for the housing they design. And they said, this is really beyond the pale, and we're not going to accept it. Now, what the hell are we all here for? Have we got to wait around for the IUA or Mr. Robert Atkins to write a brief on transport for central London? He'll be all help. We've got to wait around as if we've never thought about housing before for someone to tell us what the brief is. Well, I remember, and you remember, and a lot of us remember, all the belly aching not many years ago over a far too tight competition for Kew Gardens, where we were convinced a civil servant who hadn't got the job had written the brief. It actually told you how many coat pegs they needed. Laboratories needed. And at that time, that objection was quite allowed. But now, monstrous. There should be an ideas competition amongst architects. Like strain you. You write a brief. Just think of that. Oh, no, leave it to your clients. Leave it to Mr. Atkins. Leave it to Shirley. Leave it to your clients to decide. Well, this is the definition of client. In the Oxford Dictionary, one of the definitions of a client is someone who comes to you in a state of distress. And remind them of that. Because as far as I'm concerned, if they don't, I'm too damned expensive for them. Now, there's a sort of possibility. Actually, it's more than possibility. I think it's a probability. In the near future, there is going to be more opportunity for us to say, for us to have ideas, i.e. to write the brief, because the others aren't around. They've held back through nervousness. This is nothing national now. And therefore, there is an opportunity, not only for us to at last feel that we've got something to work at, and that we're not brought in when they've decided that credit cards don't work, or the bank rate can't be altered, so why don't we have a building, or the Chinese hordes are on the border, so why don't we have an expensive building, or whatever, So I think that's one thing about the future. I think it's absolutely marvelous that we're moving into a vacuum. And you can always tell there's vacuum, because people talk about recession or trouble or, watch it, powder dry and shortage of money and all that. That's our lovely opportunity. That's our hunting ground, gang. Now, we've got to be good, of course. Because if we fall over, no one picks us up. And the danger of the danger of spirits, mental spirits, I think can be overcome. I don't think there's ever been a better time, because in this country we've had 10 years of unbridled, boring greed. And so the spirits have shown themselves. They're not tricky to find now. And in the end products that have been thrown up, there is nothing that we can't improve on. George Bernard Shaw once defined in his definitions of the modern world as the modern house was somewhere to sleep next to the garage. No, somewhere to sleep next to the car, which was better, I beg your pardon. And in the paper last weekend, there was an advert saying, "Never again will you get soaked when rushing to open or close the garage door in the pouring rain." And they're actually selling some little button in your car that you can press and open Brookside type Tudor garage door and get your little car in, which of course was decided and designed and painted for and costed both to stand in the rain and to rot in the rain again and again and again. So we get those things around, and it's cheery to find how sort of patently barren the situation would be without the likes of us. There's a man called Patton. Everyone says he's all right, you know. He's right-wing, but he's all right. I think that's because he looks like he needs a good night's sleep, has straggly, prematurely grey hair, and makes slightly liberal noises. I think poisonous little man. Anyhow, Mr. Patton, on commenting on the government white paper on the environment, 25th September, on BBC One, early in the morning, said, "There's no point in us legislating for improved appliances and this was about improving standards of design. And he said, there's no point in us, meaning United Kingdom. This is 2 years before we're in Europe, shrieking, dragged backwards. We're there. There's no point in us legislating for improved appliances as so many are imported from abroad. We have to wait for Europe collectively to do so." So, you see, so he's actually saying, for Christ's sake, he's saying not necessarily to architects, he's saying designers, electricians, safety standard people, people who make parachutes, lavatory chains, anything, paper dispensers, say, hold back. I mean, there may be something better going on somewhere else. We'll wait for that before we legislate. Now, you can imagine telling George Stephenson that, or Brunel, or you know, the man from all places, Stoke-on-Trent, who desired the Spitfire. Watch it, you know, the Germans might come up with something better. Anyhow, sorry. Well, that's what we've been told. Quite rightly. I mean, he's meant to be coherent mental toy of some sort. Now, that distinguished, well, that noteworthy architect, David Price, I think has got a feeling about timing and things and not hanging around and not being too worried about quite who he's working for. Wasn't it wonderful? Someone must have known I was in trouble. Right. Right. Pics. Now, within a week, these are two buildings designed by David Price, and within a week, and within 100 yards of each other, they were opened about a couple of weeks ago. One was opened on the left by the Duke of Edinburgh, and the other was opened by the River Thames Mafia. And one celebrates the Chindits, Wingate's Chindits from the Burma, and has all sorts of tricky little things. In fact, the Royal Fine Arts Commission loathed it, because they said, oh, must take Portland stone down to the glass. Portland stones always go down to the... You know who it is. If you've been to them, you'll know who I'm... Down to the glass. Portland stone. So he has red marble steps, and in fact, it's cut back where the cloth was dropped. And it's also cut back where he has incredibly vulgar enameled and polished bronze roundels with a Morse code sign for Chindit on one and Wavell on the other, and a full-size Chindit, which they cast from the wooden one held by the North Staffords in North Germany. They got over it. But, and the other thing he said, also, we find that shape a little bulbous. And so David Price, being a man who always listens, said, oh, what do you mean by bulbous? He said, well, it looks rather like electrical equipment. And so he said, do you mean a fridge? And they said, well, yes. He said, that's why I based it on. It's absolutely right. So he thanked them for his advice and went ahead and did it. And the other thing over there I like, and you can see that blue stain they sell for timber, it really does work. But that's very funny because it's all the signs and things. Even a pigeon can switch them over the other side. The finger holes, I mean, signs and things move. And that's an interesting thing, which I think we may come across again, is that I don't think at the time of designing, we have to be a bit too worried about permanence versus impermanence, or the temporary and the permanent aesthetic, you know. I mean, for all we know, there may be a Chindit left off that thing who put one of his remaining Burmese grenades under the thing and blow it flat, whereas someone might sort of say, well, that is wonderful, you know, riverside aesthetics, been photographed by the Architectural Review. We must save it, and though it's rotting, and we keep the thing going. So you never know. It doesn't matter. If you're a designer as acutely insensitive to other people's conceits as David Price is, you produce some quite nice things. I'm interested in the future and in the way that those who in some way are already involved in it, more than we are. And we know how long the funding of the Hubble telescopes is going. It doesn't really matter whether it works or doesn't work. What interests me there is, one, well, I suppose it does. There's a chance for Hubble number 2. But what interests me there is that Jodrell Bank, which was a very private place, is now sort of a tourist base, still doing very good work, but saying, we let you loose on the universe. Whereas the other, in the advert, says, hold on, we want to show you that we're checking out the universe for you as long as you pay your taxes. And I quite like this they came out again within about a week of each other, these two adverts. So there's this business of suspension of trust until the experts take over on your part. I'm sorry about this, catafalque. Can you see? Is that in your way? Is the pumpkin in your way? Never be in your way, would it? Pumpkin probably fly away. Anyhow, so it's not a design slide, that one. It's a timing. It's a sort of a trust, and where we come in. Where we come in, whether we're going to be con artists, spiv artists, sluggards and lazy, or say, you know, give us a bit of trust and we can help you leapfrog. I think that interests me, though, is because I don't know which one of those two I find more encouraging. The fact that they're both, in a way, adverts. They're both happening anyhow. That's the nice thing about the future, of course. People talk about the future. They don't have to answer questions. They just have to say them, don't they? Makes this evening very easy for me. I love that. Some of you can't see it, but what I quite like is that is Gregotti's idea of a typical Irish rural house. Well, now, you know, it was a rural house owned by the English, burnt and blown up in the Troubles. Been a ruin for years and years, occupied by sheep and the ivy, which has grown out of the windows. But then it makes you think, well, perhaps, you know, perhaps we should accelerate ruination. Because it's already in Italy, that is seen as a typically Irish rural house. And if they go to Ireland and find things with glass in the windows and a roof on, you know, they're just going to think they're rather like us. Awful. And then there's this Sellafield thing, which is wind scale, isn't it? Now it's Sellafield. Now it's just as polluted as wind scale was, so they don't know whether to go back the first name or third name. It's like that airport in New York. Never mind. And the whole thing is that on the back of the folder, window on the nuclear world. You're told about dinky little trains and some derelict castle that's been lived in by some second-rate family of 300 years. You know, if you're bored with the fallout and the risk, and again, this business of others being in a way not necessarily cleverer than us or anything like that, but being a little easier on saying, oh, well, throw it all in. That's something like that. That's all right. You know, we've got to get grants. We've got to, you know, get rid of a bit more Italian rubbish that no other country would handle. We'll sink it in the Irish Sea. Oh, no, it's probably cause enough. And so that's the end of my comment on that. I'm umming and ahhing. I put it down to the cold, Gov. And this whole business about whether you're building a ruin or saving a ruin or trying to encourage one, is in these two sides. There is a move, buildings in the foreground in sort of buckled salmon pink aluminium paneling were largely designed by Paul Hyatt, who isn't here tonight, but sent an apology. He used to work in the office. And they now, the Olympia in New York are thinking of buying those and flattening them, or someone else is, and putting something else there. And, one of those towers was topped out by McAlpines yesterday, and they go on up. And it occurred to me when I saw that photograph, and because of this wonderful thing that, you know, if the tube works, the fact that in the old days, used to say, well, Edgware is a wonderful place to live. And it was just trees, cows, and muddy lanes. And they said, because we're putting a tube there. Now, they build great sort of temples and say, well, it'll work if the tube comes along. and again, I think we've got to think about this in the future. I think it's full of possibilities. It's full of possibilities of funding the Olympia New York brothers to stop work right now, fill in the bits that they can, and have one or two absolutely staggering. We might even probably even buy the cranes off the Calpines. But we might have a great deal of sky handling and a few open floors and lifts that we know are underused because not all. You know, it might be a good place to say, hold it for a bit. The government will buy the ruin. You can use the bits. And this is what we did in a way with Frankfurt, a limited competition, which rather like the one Ron described. I'm very successful at the competition. Standard failure. There were 3 firms, weren't there, Ron? We came third. 3. It wasn't even an open competition. There were only 3 firms in for that building in Trondheim. We came third. Well, I was one of the invited competitions together with, I can't remember his name, man who did Habitat, and Erskine, who did Biker, didn't he, and someone else, anyhow. 4 international architects, so-called, we were all paid, and I think that's all they needed, to have our names on there. None of us was placed. Ungers up the street got the job, of course. Frankfurt, but there, in fact, we were looking at taking the odd floor out and linking up at that level to buildings as not yet built in the campus. And, of course, it struck me that in the future, quite forget Olympia, New York, anything like that, but it may be that there are situations where the whole infrastructure can be altered if, in fact, we start thinking about different layers above ground as well as below. And there's nothing new in that, except we don't think that way now. We're sort of tuned in to sort of mechanized molding, whether it's tubes or channel tunnels, and the cleverness of Otis. We're sort of, and you never know, there might be something else. I don't mean dinky little toy railways that run along as if they're proper railways along the lines where railways would, but this whole business of taking out bits of accepting buildings, however new, as in a way, natural hazards built by others, therefore they are a hazard. Taking out bits and relinking, and not doing that in any sort of dreamy way, but doing it as a service to our nervous clients who come to us in a state of distress. See? And so that I think is something worth looking at. So that is a bit of sort of active tinkering. But of course it does require a great deal of architectural and technical skill. Next. And these points are just general in relation to what I will think, or I will try constantly think in the future, are still relevant. That is, I do think you have to, in a way, self-order yourself. Or at least I do. Otherwise, one moves very quickly into thinking that damn fool thing for that garage door is really rather useful after all, rather than thinking about where you keep cars, why you have garages, and why indeed you should walk out in the rain anyhow. And so this just reminds me that although I think, and it is all speculation tonight, I imagine that the whole nature of organized office space, the sort of office space that one saw being constructed in Canary Wharf and things like that, will radically change in a comparatively short time. I mean, 3 to 5 years. Already the floors that were allowed for by whatever his name was, Flying Bedstead, Travelstead, or the first man at Olympia in New York, wore stiff collars, American though. He was talking about, meter and a half for fiber optics. Now you can put them down the middle of a sort of hollow piece of spaghetti, because they're not, the whole technology of layering and technological feeding of workstations is going out very rapidly. The whole idea of workstations is going out. They're rather the mobile person who can moon looking through a window of view, sitting in a nice chair, walking and talking to someone else and using his terminal to find something or to put something on his electronic notebook. And therefore the whole nature of organization of offices, particularly because the nature of organization of implementation of promotion in office life is far more tribal and less pyramidal, less hierarchical, less religious than it was, because people move their jobs very quickly, and so you don't take up a job that's going to be yours for a lifetime. And this whole business of being as an acute at office as you can be at home is being realized by people who require this comparatively static labor force during the days of daylight, which is a pretty nasty demand to make on people, because the other slide shows, for a lot of people, it doesn't really matter where you are as far as contact, exchange, and feedback. And I think this is being realized, and will be, in 3 or 5 years' time. And the only point of the picture on the left is an office that we were working on, where in fact you have the same activities, but they are given extraordinarily different sort of shaped spaces in which to be. So you start introducing choices. And certainly the narrow shapes there, as far as I remember, the seating was all going to be sort of wickerwork chairs with big floral cushions and things. Certainly not workstations that were just happy for the light fitting. So I think you want to look on that. I mean, I don't think that design of office spaces is at all boring, as I'm sure Mr. Duffy would agree. We'll come on to him later. The nature of really of the structures that were implied in that, I think, really rather early 20th century relic that's being built at Canary Wharf, reminded me that we must remember and go and see the things, that there are enormous structures being built every day of the week in this country, all around the coast, gigantic structures, that don't have exhibitions and aren't put on display. And very often, many of them are sunk after they've been built, so you can't even see them. Also, while they're being positioned, as on the left, you can go on working on them. And that's something worth thinking about. That you don't always have to wait either for the first factory floor, you know, the controlled environment where you can do your casting or stamp out your car doors or whatever, and your final thing, which is the showroom, the motorway, or the Sylvan Valley on Slough Industrial Estates, or whatever techno parks grow out these days. But in the meantime, if you choose your site and you choose your modes of transport, then in fact, and you have a cyclical period that allows for construction while moving, which isn't a technical thing, it's a management and programming thing, that you can go on building while you're moving. So who pays for that? Do they call it a building site or a traveling track? That's not our concern, but it is our concern to realize these possibilities. And it's not something that we don't realize, it's something that I don't think at the moment, but we will in the next 3 to 5 years, certainly with the Europe link, we won't realize that the whole scale of that sort of operation is already going on, but isn't anything like as rich as it could be until it has an architectural introduction. I think I mean that. I'll think about it. And the other thing on the right is an all-tin living module, which is actually on a barge there, but is later on going into the North Sea and is going to be lifted up by 2 cranes, one of which, and these cranes already exist, in fact they're rusting, one of which could lift up the entire Cambridge University Library by Jim Sterling with the books in. Because you remember, there was all business about reciting it, wasn't it? He didn't design it on wheels. I mean, not even Jim's perfect. And then, of course, if you go to something really important, like this whole question of size, it's worth taking something as mean and modest as this lovely little catafalque-like product on the left, which, given the right conditions, i.e. it isn't raining or they want to sell some bananas or something, can open out and spread out. And, I mean, that's all it is, just a market stall, and that's how big it can be. But again, I think there will be demands made on us, not by individual clients, but by conditions, to be very clever at designing the improved architectural umbrella. Another prediction. Another instance of the spoils of war on the left. Can you all read it? Perhaps you can't. One way that the Home Office could reduce overcrowding is by the use of prison ships. What was it? Great Expectations or something. Yeah. UK Marine Assets Company, Bibby Line, has sold 2 ex-Falklands troop ships to the New York City Department of Corrections and is lobbying the UK government to follow the example. These are, in fact, prison hulks, which are now anchored off Manhattan, but you can't get a postcard of them yet. The interesting thing on the other side, which is a train going past our extremely temporary headquarters at Kentish Town for Interaction Centre, was when those cabins, those are all the wet services, were delivered for being plugged into the big dry building, which had no wet services and no high-powered electrics in at all on purpose, that some of these cabins were delivered by the truck driver to the building site, because he thought they weren't for the final building, they were for the builders building the building. Think on that. Think on that. Think on the client who comes along and you've organized your building site so well, so beautifully. Canteens so good, safety conditions so wonderful, shelters against noise, dust, sound pollution, sound pollution, rainwater for your workmen, wonderful, all happy workmen, that the client says, hold it, I won't have the building, I'll have what you've done already. Now that is quite likely to come up in the next 5 to 10 years. That is, that rather like, as you've probably seen, this whole business of Channel 4 deciding to move, purely because there's been a political move that allows them to do their own advertising. So it's nothing to do with the quality of Channel 4 or anything like that. They now can employ their own advertising agents, not pay the extra 12%, but Charlotte Street is too small. Now, you might find that the BBC at Shepherd's Bush has to shrink for exactly the same reason. What's all that? Oh, yes. Oh, we're on to them. We're not on the final leg, but, you know, you're getting near to the end now. Another hour and a quarter, if you're all right. I'm sorry if this is cutting out magical views for any of you. I don't want you to miss particularly the quality of these two drawings. Yeah, well, this is my suggestion, that if you have something like the centre of Tokyo, and it's scarcely any other place on the world like the centre of Tokyo, but there are a few where, in fact, the density of operation of movement is such, and the inherent laws, in this case related to earthquake and resultant fire, because that's where lives are lost. It's not the actual earthquake itself, it's the fires from Mr. Brandyman's signs that go up in smoke and things like that, that Tokyo has the most marvelous rules for safety, both for escape and strength of structures. I mean, Germany has better rules than us, but they both are put in the shade. Now, why don't we have a look at you know, why are we waiting for city burghers in Tokyo to write good safety rules? Why don't we really start thinking about what would be the ideal safety rules in any city, whether it's to avoid madness or jumping out of the 13th floor window or car, or whatever, you know, or rats, 10 times as many rats as human beings in London tonight. Now remember that. So don't starve them, because they'll be up. Now, I don't feel too well either. The whole thing about the Tokyo competition was there was so much servicing, access that was needed and was available. There were about 5 floors of tube station that was being built already. There was so much below ground that one could afford to indulge in, and I've quoted Bucky Fuller there, into fancy nozzles. Because when someone said to him, well, it's all very well, you wanting everyone to live in domes, you know, landed by helicopters in the desert, they said, just look at Westchester County, you know, or uptown Poughkeepsie or whatever, you know, and just look at these wonderful houses in Dallas and things like that. You know, what's your answer to that? And Bucky said, well, my answer would be actually to put a very high-powered fire hose on the lot of them, ground level, for 24 hours. You take off 2 feet of topsoil and muck, and you'll find all you've got is a network of pipes with fancy nozzles. And so our scheme for Tokyo, which I wouldn't go down very well, certainly didn't with the jury, was a series of awfully fancy nozzles, which at least could fall over independently if there was an earthquake without, because really all the operation, all the sorting out, communication, the assembly, disassembly and things went on below ground and could go because we had to excavate. So, point of that, sounds like explaining the schemes all on the wall. The point of that is that the point really is that I don't think anyone, whether it's not people paying, it's not government or private clients, I think it's population in general, will not wait for architects to indulge themselves in doing triple tartan schemes for the next 5 years. They don't want to know it. They know it can be done. You know, find the layer of tartan that's relevant. then we'll do the rest. I'm glad I'm not having questions to work that one out. Another thing that I think is coming increasingly, and I use these examples purely because they're on the wall next door, is that there is, over and above, and we're coming onto this whole business of skin, you see, and they say, oh, I don't know what the buildings are, you know, change the skin, postmodern, modern skin, and things like that. I'm not sure whether, in fact, the skin shouldn't do more than that. And I think that a number of opportunities will arise where you can achieve economies in time and cost and materials and richness, decadent richness in quality of environment and exchange, which normally is not priced, you see, until they say just feel the material, you know. By looking into whether one can put quite a few tasks on the skin and quite different tasks on the inside and not be too sensitive about how they join up. Like building in France, where if you have two different contractors, they never join up. Bit a little aside. So that interests me very much. And it leads me to this. It's an advert. Behind many of Britain's better brickwork facades is Hallfen, supporting and restraining, securely and economically. Hallfen have the technology and the experience to design the supports for brickwork of all types, simple and complex, decorative and functional. Better brickwork stands on the inside with fixings by Hallfen. Now, you see, the whole thing is that brickwork awfully good at holding up buildings, actually. I mean, that's why they're those shapes and they're not random or circular or wobbly. And we stick them and we bake them. It takes a lot of compression. I mean, brickwork primarily is a very good, cheap way of holding up a building. Not with Hallfen, not with new British technology. Stainless steel. I don't know where the camera is. Now, if that's going to happen, which I suggest it is, then one could go a bit further and say, well, sod brickwork, we'll have biscuits. You know, and then it can be technologically edible as well as so. So I think this whole business of separation, something that we might have very, very nearer than we know, sooner than we know. And so this is really, I think it's next door, but it's just seeing when you're designing things, how much inners and outers could be made quite separately, quite differently. Sorry about that. And also, it does, which is happening, apart from sort of flashy showrooms in Covent Garden, the whole business about furniture and non-furniture, and fittings and non-fittings, and whether a chair is a table, is a building, is a house, is a workspace, and all that. To a large extent, I think it has a lot to do with convenience of alteration and delivery, and fun enough, the question of size, not scale at all. Anyhow, I think that there'll be, I think there are a few furniture manufacturers in Western Europe at the moment who would be far better builders than some builders. And fun enough, vice versa, which is a reasonable thing to say when you've got a heavy cold. Now, this happens to be a railway station, but the point about this really is moving on from the business about furniture And it is very nice to think of the terrible loads put on one leg of a four-legged table when the other three are not quite doing their job. Very few buildings can take that stick, and yet a good table can. And this really is, of course, well, it isn't the only reason, but one of the reasons is that the leg, if properly connected, is in torsion. That is, that it's not only taking a certain amount of tension lowering, a certain amount of compression, it's actually compensating for twist. And the whole nature of a structure of torsion hasn't been looked into, certainly not in architecture, very much. It is being looked into, I know, by Frank Newby, and of course it was looked into by whoever designed those incredible lattice masts for anchoring the large airships to, which of course had to take an awful amount of torsion, because you never knew once the thing was anchored and the wind caught it, whether you were twisting up, down, turning, pulling, pushing, and the lot. So the whole nature of the braced helical spring and things like that in structural terms, as opposed to the normal trabeated beam or solid box structure or anything like that, I feel has got to be looked into very carefully and will be. I think all these things will be. They're not wishes on my part. I think they're inevitable. Oh, and in relation to this building, we've always been interested in tubes, because if you connect them with other tubes, if you don't do the architecturally acceptable thing of always slicing the end of the tube and putting a T-plate in and welding it, you know, the T-junction, which I won't mention the various details you can find like that in Cambridge and other places. If you actually fix tube with tube, and if you're brave enough to do a sort of rum-looking casting that doesn't have much glamour about its shape, then in fact you probably don't even have to weld the tube into the casting. You can just sleeve things in, because you're carrying exactly the same, whether it's a compression member or a tension member, through the casting as you're doing through the tube. I like tubes. I did one of the biggest tubular structures in the world 30 years ago. Also like the whole business that I feel that the introduction of this is an old thing, but I think it's happening more, and this possibly is because of clients in a real state of distress, or clients who never realize they're clients because they think they're public and therefore should accept everything given to them by the powers that be. I think that sort of wave of realizing that bus stations, railway stations, reception rooms in airports and things are a bloody inconvenience, except for the person selling cheap booze, checking out bombs, or trying to make an excuse for late airplanes or trains. And no amount of rubber plants, Barcelona chairs, works of art by Stefan Knapp, or free booze will overcome the fact there's a bloody nuisance being held up. What's happened? Who's done that? I mean, I can take a hint if you want the place. Another hour of this before you have your pumpkins. Anyhow, and I think this will happen. Marvelous thing in relation to Europe, which is a very small scene as far as international travel goes, but in relation to Europe, the whole business of no passports and no duty-free and all that in 2 or 3 years' time will be marvelous. What is the whole thing that the general public, us, will say, no, hold on, you know, why don't you check our luggage at home? Why is all this sort of collective things like naughty, why are we being treated like naughty cattle with explosive bells around our necks? You know, and also, and I think I think transport generally will change, particularly when you get interchangeable, never mind interchangeable currency, when you get interchangeable transport dockets. I suppose the rabid foxes will be the first to wear those around their necks as they speed through the channel, but never, Channel Tunnel, but never, you know. All have to take risks, but it's going to be very exciting next few years. Marvellous. And, it's funny how these slides just drop into place. It's been worked out. Talking about travel and Channel Tunnel, I think that another great man who, again, his work will be realized, and not realized as, oh, let's have a, you know, Morandi festival, but will be cribbed. That's the best realization of good work, that people crib it when he's dead. And Morandi, I think, was one of the world's great engineers. I had the honor to meet him, but that happens to all old men. This interchange, I don't even know where it is, but I don't know if any of you know Stockport. Well, this isn't Stockport, but I wish it was, in so much as Stockport has an incredible valley with trains and mills and old railway lines and old motorways, and then new railway lines and new motorways. And this is somewhere rather like Stockport, where he did both those. He did the bridge and the motorway. And I don't think he did the gasometer, but he wouldn't have minded there. And it's quite nice that I think that there is a freeing up, fun enough, through urgency, through sheer panic on the part of those people involved with transport, whether it's politicians or anyone else, that's some absolutely wonderful hyper superstructures, using the word as I like it anyhow, will be occasioned throughout Western Europe, at least, in the next 5 years, where there'll be no question, what's the sun look like through there, or how being sensitive to the shadows of the mill chimney that you're crossing by. How about the Pennine sheep in the dry zone? They say, right, we're taking another 80 feet up, right, and I think then and that's where, again, we are needed. But we are only ever needed if we are prouder than the rest, or at least as proud actually to contribute to the future, and not shy about fucking around with the past. The thing on right-hand side, I have this video, in 1993, cut out nasty bit. There's a prototype, in case Mr. Cedric gets away. We only have the service tunnel through the channel thing. That's the prototype train. Goes one way and comes back. Yes, right. We haven't got on to education. Might not get on to it tonight. What have we got now? Ah, yes. Insertions. So there we've done all that sort of giant motorways. By the way, Morandi did the Maracaibo Bridge, which, Lake Maracaibo, and that's when I met him, because he came over here and talked about it. But it had about 16, primarily it was to get road traffic across Lake Maracaibo. Lake Maracaibo is like, family history as far as the subterranean conditions go. There's oil, shale, there's mud, the little explosive bits, the hot water. It's hell. There's nothing you don't know what's under the lake. Sometimes a bit of rock, next time it's mud, next time whatever you put down there just vanishes. And there are sort of nasty little winds on it and awful temperatures, and steel gets eaten away in about 6 months and things like that. And so he actually designed and built a bridge which was almost a Walt Disney projection of geological difficulties below the surface, with a touch of weather forecasting above in the materials he used. So he did pre-tensioned concrete struts, which actually did all the tensioning that you'd normally use steel members. So you see things and you say, well, that must be in tension, but it's concrete. Dead right it was. And he put the tension in beforehand because concrete stopped the rotting. And it's a wonderful bridge. You know, again, it would print awfully badly. it's everything. Bits change on one side that aren't the same on the other. Even the handrail, because people get blown off that side and not that side. Wonderful. Marvelous. Now, talking about insertions, which is related to Sagami Bay thing, which that's one thing I'm a bit sorry. I think all the other schemes are obviously sort of concentrated things. Sagami Bay I would have liked to put a bit more in, and I didn't. No secret reason. I should have put more in. Should have another panel. But this is another Japanese scheme where, in fact, all one is very interested in dense areas of population, which in Japan do not necessarily mean, you know, flat urban plains. It might mean water. It might mean the side of a hill. It might mean a valley, which is the only place of a fast-moving river, the only place you leave. It might mean floating islands, which actually do float, or man-made islands which go down to the bottom. Whole range of things where, over and above the structure that one has at the moment, which is rapidly changing, may the first to appreciate that there are some qualities of servicing which, if there could be sort of inserts, in a way service stations, which might be nothing more than a blob, something like that, that can be put somewhere and linked to other networks, then in fact the rest of the quality of living in that area could be improved. So in a way it's a sort of an electronic, socially sensitive post box, or whatever. And they're very responsive to that, I think, because it may be because they realize that it's no big deal. It's not going to ruin a town sticking great telephonic pineapples on that you get print-offs or talk someone through, or get text change something, or change the immediate weather, or get tape music through. And also, they're also very aware, and I think because it happens to be an aspect of Japanese interest, I don't think there are any such things made at the moment, that it probably will spread very quickly. And again, the whole business about insert and overlay, which can have a different life cycle to that which you insert into or that which you overlay, is, I think, something where architecture is right on the edge of realizing its role, and certainly will in the next 5 years. By keeping it roughly 5 years, not 10 years, right? So who knows? I might see this kind of chance. And again, I don't know how well this is explained, but over and above the insert, there are there's sort of urban and metropolitan and industrial, man-made, social, environmental leper areas. We made them. We made them, whether it's Sellafield or sewage farms south of London Airport, or London Airport itself. We're making them still. There are instances where, in fact, those responsible for the ownership and control of land, in this case, a large area of derelict docks right in the middle of Hamburg. Now, the reason they're derelict doesn't matter. It's easy to work out. Size of ships, oil, those things. Hamburg's very prosperous dock. This area's not. Architects, I think, must and are slowly realizing, again 5 years, that they can be of use in helping those in power or ownership not having to make their mind up all that soon. Doctors do that. They say, have these tablets. Let me know if they don't work, but don't come back for a week. Have them for a week, let me know. No one complains about that. They think, what a sensitive man, a long view of life he's got, and all that. And I do think that there certainly in relation to our Hamburg scheme, which is an absolute key one, and I won't go in any detail, but primarily what it is say, no, don't build another Canary Wharf. I mean, don't bother, just wreck it. You've got sand. You might want it for something else. You own it, the city owns it. It's not going to support an Olympic stadium. No ships want to go there. If you leave it as it is, bits are going to fall off and you're going to sink another ferry load of English tourists and another, and all that. You know, just clear it down to the mud. Leave a few of the ruins in that work like coins. You've got a wonderful tide, one of the biggest tidal rivers in the world, the Elbe, particularly at this point. And what's more, you have all these blasted sheep, what are they called? Not sheep. Wildfowl, yeah, geese. I'm not too good at all that. Geese, not sheep. All these geese flying down from Vladivostok, and they sort of awful timetable every year, making for Peter Scott from the 7. And they stop off at the mouth of the thing. Ideal. All you've got to do is plant some grass. You've got natural sand. You know what grows there. Have ducklands. Never mind docklands. Have ducklands in the middle of that. You know, that'd be wonderful, wonderful new link, a new loan. What a wonderful generosity from the city. Hasn't cost a thing. Saved them a fortune. Up in street, I mean, and of course the nice thing about this is another thing. Never mind my scheme. The thing is, find out where there are people wanting to be useful and who haven't been asked a question for ages. I mean, Hamburg has the 3 most brilliant hydrological institutes, certainly in Europe, better than Wallingford and place we have here. And they're dying for someone to ask them questions. Because they've done it all. You know, they know the Elbe back. Oh, God, tell us where to throw your grandmother in and wash her out to sea and find it. We know everything. They know everything about them. And if you find, and then all of the Green Party, I'm a great friend of the Greens now. They came up from Bremerhaven for this scheme. They tell me which sort of plants would grow on that and where the sheep would come from. And so what I'm saying is, never mind me or you, the point is there are lots of people who don't realize at the moment, who can do over the next 5 years, just how useful they can be to a whole subculture called architecture. And they're waiting to help us. Marvelous men, women. Next. Oh, it's a nice lag. Order myself. Something to do with hand. It's Richard Gregory, eye, hand, sound. Ah, yes, look at that. Well, I won't go into the details there. That's metric. Oh, they're both metric, yes. But the whole business is, always interests me, and I think there's some drawings there, is that to get over mud and things, that if you're only going over mud, and you mustn't jump on it because it'll just upset the geese for having their meal before flying even further south, but you want to look at them, then in fact you can direct people like you direct sheep in sheep pounds. You know, we've got enough through there, turn the gate, do it that way. Particularly if your foundation is water or mud, because it is the most marvellous bearing surface ever was. And as I said, Queen Elizabeth, 83,000 tons, Southampton, used to have 18 inches freeboard underneath it in dock, and it was perfectly level in harbour. No one paid for the foundations. Not a wine glass broke, the pianos thing, puddings came on board, passengers, 18 inches, 83,000 tons. So no problem, you know, if you're not in a rush, try water. Hydraulics, absolutely marvellous. Again, will be looked at, wonderful science, very, very accessible to architects, and of course, beautifully cheap to clients. Except in London, where we did away with the largest high-pressure hydraulic system the world had ever known. And it was working when I was here, and no one, the GLC were required to sell it. And it all went. But it lifted lifts, and it was the standby for Tower Bridge. It did the floor at Earl's Court, baths, did all the docks at Wapping Gates, things. No one saw such line of that dock gate's taking a bit long to close today. You know, so as long as you're not in a rush, water's good. And so that's what that is about, obviously. We'll see what it is. And that's the thing, we're building a prototype. This is a new thing. This is, this is a sort of lazy, public, pedestrian mud submarine, best described. That's 150 meters long, and it's under tests at the moment. And it will adapt. As it tries to sink, it resists sinking. So rather than spanning mud or putting little flotation things in, you put in something that, you know, equal and opposite pressure, and its floats go down. But I mean, again, it's all the technology of what are those funny little speedboats that put their legs down when they're going fast? Hydrofoils or something. Similarly, but we're in slow mud with beer bottles and things in it. Next. I think it's future. I have to watch being sort of self-indulgent and just being delighted in what I'm doing, because I do that the rest of the week. Oh yes, again, we had the insertion, we had the overlay, the funny walks across the beach, or funny little floating submarines. And here, of course, is the scheme on the left. Primarily what it's doing is putting a halo, which actually is triangular. It was going to be circular, but structurally it was a waste of time being circular. But anyhow, it's really a gigantic horizontal aerial shooting out enormous amount of electricity at different wavelengths, sufficient because it is so close to the ground and has such has a calculated wastage factor that you get something rather like the in Sutton Coldfield, where there's great television antennae and things, not the rugby ones, Sutton Coldfield. People run their refrigerators without a cable. I mean, you know, so there's, you can, it's not all, you know, the great mushroom and sharpening razor blades under a pyramid. There are odd waves that you can pick up if they're pushed out with sufficient intensity closely enough, as vis-a-vis the post office tower and microwaves. So anyhow, this really is putting electronic halo over a desirable but near derelict village in Yugoslavia. And the only way you could put that thing, so they can go on going to primitive lavatories and not having glass in their windows and all that magic that makes hill life so wonderful in the sun. So you don't muck around with that, but you do actually get the halo up there, the triangular halo, and hold it up by means of large mobile cranes, which you can lock, and you can angle it, deciding whether you want the halo to run down the main street on the other side of the church and things. Being triangular, you can angle all three sides. That's one advantage over the circle, if you think of it. And having locked them and taken the rubber tires off so they're not slashed, torn, or burnt, and the driver's gone away, you then transfer the motors into generators for the electricity, so you don't even have to wire the thing up. You just keep the engines going decently down the hill so they don't smell or can be heard. Anyhow, it's an idea, but I mean, the whole business about tuning places up like that brings me on to the point of craneage. And there's a half-destroyed power station in Battersea where there have been some very expensive cranes for 2 years now, I think, doing nothing because of the contract arrangement. Now, what I'm actually saying is that it's worth looking at this enormous amount of equipment, of cranes, not construction cranes, but maritime cranes, things like that, which aren't in use, but can be utilized comparatively cheaply if they're locked in position. Safety requirements are there, that's all there. So that element of slightly, using soiled second-hand goods, I think also is an element of the future as far as architects go, because they would never call them soiled second-hand goods. They'd say, just look how inventive I am to use a crane for another reason than not moving. So I think the whole business about craneage and lifting is rather different from static tension structures. And that's why I put the other one on, because although these are static posts, I hadn't talked about me for ages, this evening. I was very honored to be the only international judge that gave that structure an award for the Dutch Steel Award 2 years ago, which is this incredible greenhouse in Arnhem, where there's tropical rainforests inside. It's about the size, it's 150 meters by about 25 meters. And it is actually marvelous. But the most exciting thing about it, back to the skin, is that it's a triple layer air structure. But the outer layer, let's get the things right, is 150 microns of plastic, which ain't too thick. 150 microns, the outer layer. The middle layer is 50 microns, and the inner layer is 100 microns. So the entire plastic skin is less than 1/3 of a millimeter. And there's air passed through those layers. Now, that is 1980. And it's we didn't have it. We worked on with double layer structures with air net between and things, but we had nothing of this level. And it's 6 times as expensive as glass, but it's a damn sight better insulator. And what they do here actually is to keep the heat out, because although it's tropical rainforest, they don't want direct heat, because there isn't enough tropical leaves. They need lots of those leaves, and that's the skin. So it very often works keeping heat out as well as keeping it in. So the structure, which is a lovely space frame and has these posts, which could well be cranes, has a whole range of things which I think are elements which I know will be in wider use in the future and should be looked at very carefully by architects. I've got to find out more about this particular skill. I love it. It's very exciting. Right. You may find I go straight away again. Straight away. Oh, that's it. Think of those sort of figures on the skin on the sides in relation to a structure. And then, again, I think because up till now, well, not up till now, but up till before this country turned into a period of barbaric spirits. So up to about 1970, there was quite a degree of rapport and exchange between statisticians, sociologists, social scientists, actuaries, and things like that, and the architectural profession. Forget all the structure thing, all that. And that's died. And in fact, a lot of people, and geographers, of course, economic geographers, and they have actually died or gone to America. But all that sort of exchange has petered out, and I think it's just on the way to petering back in. And some things which are being considered by architects politicians, sociologists, and statisticians alike, as a collective menu or a recipe, not as individual things, though isn't that interesting. And I've just written a few down. For instance, in this country now, there are 18% one-parent families. And by the year 2030, 1.5 million people will be over the age of 85. 50% of households in this country, don't forget the one-parent families, 50% of households have microwave cookers at the moment. 60% have video recorders, both superb distorters of time and place, both making the rack of spice jars and strings of garlic and kitchen clocks and carving knives are totally irrelevant. 20% of households, don't forget the one-person family, have computers at home. Plastic sheeting on scaffolding has a very, very nice quality. It's rather better than that sort of glass that has little white spots printed on it electronically that they use to cover the bad gasket work in cheap cars. When in fact it's put up reasonably seriously, and this isn't all that serious on the left, it does make you feel, why not leave it there? They'd taken down quite a lot of that building when that was there. And then when you look on the right-hand side, and you think, well, I don't think Charles Jakes is going to worry about this arcade, because it's only going to be there 7 days. I mean, there's a little sign, apology sign, saying we apologize for this scaffolding arcade we had to put up. We hope it's, and you can see the lady, I love that lady sitting on the rubbish bin. I couldn't get her to move. And then there are other little arcades found, rather more elegant ones, more sort of more Brunelleschi sort of style on that. But I mean, all this delicate magic that is being built as junk, as apologies for pulling down a building or putting up a new building, all around town, with care, attention, quality, scale, not an architect in miles. And eventually people realize, look, don't tell me that London Airport's going to be lovely one of these days. Let it be lovely every day. I no more apology signs, no more wobbly bits of ply. Get that ply right. Get that plastic skin right and keep it. Keep it. And let's have better plastic skin when that comes along. Or jollier scaffolding tubes, because they're fine. We know what it's about, and it makes us feel we're about to get on an aeroplane, not that we're being conned into a furniture showroom. Now, so what primary saying is that if the product is good, you don't need to style it up too much. And actually, on the right-hand side, because I'm a member of the Institute of Subterranean Technology, what's it called? I forgot what I'm a member of the Institute of. Anyway, it's underwater technology. And I thought back. I mean, what they're actually doing is having awful trouble getting rid of old oil rigs and not knowing whether to blow them up or allow fish farms to grow around them, and desperate about sinking ships and very expensive to take them out. But it's entitled Severing with Sensitivity. And that actually, I led you into this because you're interested in the future. That is going to be the title of my next lecture. Severing with Sensitivity, I thought. Because primarily what I'm saying tonight, as an adjunct, really, to the exhibits next door is that I know what I'm saying, and what I think is certainly one glass ball for the future is that due to us, due to our efforts over the future, that the quality of the temporary must make the permanent so shabby that the latter is not even demanded. And that's, I think, the way it's going. And that is structurally, politically, aesthetically, environmentally. Because the whole business about permanent and temporary means nothing, really. It's language. As I've shown you, it doesn't matter whether Canary Wharf is going up or going down. But weather forecasts for the next 2 days saying the weather for the next 2 days is going to be extremely variable. That means they don't know what it's going to be like. Now, is that a temporary condition or a permanent outlook? You see, we fool ourselves, and when we fool ourselves, other people pay, whether out of their pockets or, more importantly, in misery. When we fool ourselves that there is a division between temporary and permanent, then in fact we sort of make allowances for the one and make demands on the other. And I think to counteract and then right the situation, that the next 5 years will find us collectively enjoying the quality and richness of the temporary to such a state that what was considered permanent, it will be too shabby to put up with. That's the future. And you've got half an hour, because I finished. Thank you very much. Prepare for your party.